murder news.
Greetings from the MMN commune, the true crime cult with all of the baby goats and none of the brainwashing. I'm Angelina, and I'm hanging out with my pal Aurora, the real housewife of true crime. How's your week going?
It's good. I think we're getting our initial cool down into fall, which makes me so excited. How about you?
Exactly the same thing, which is like making all kinds of warm, fuzzy feelings for me, which seems off because it's been pouring rain and like super gray to the point that if I don't turn all my lights on inside, that it like just feels spooky and nighttime.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that is could be a little more of a downer, but it's not for me. I'm ready for it. I just actually, same.
We don't need the sun.
No, we don't. We don't need, we are, easily burnable, fragile people that do not need that much sun. So we need more lattes than sun. I just saw yesterday that the original, skeleton dance Disney cartoon thing came out this week, like 93 years ago or something. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not off for getting into that vibe right now. Like this is the appropriate
it's that time of the year, and Disney has declared it always has been.
So I'll follow that. I take it.
Cute. Of course, we consider all of you listeners to be honorary monsters, but if you'd like to make it official, you can join the MMN commune at patreon.com/murdernews. Make a monthly pledge of whatever amount you like, whether you've got a few extra bucks or a few hundred. And to show how much we appreciate your support, we'll give you a shout out on the show, give you a cool title like Grandmaster of Goats, and you'll have exclusive access to our regular patron-only content.
Now let's kick things off with a look at some true crime stories that have been making headlines this week.
A former Kansas police officer is facing 20 criminal charges relating to sexual assault. According to People, Todd Allen was charged with 2 counts of rape, 3 counts of attempted rape, 1 count of aggravated indecent liberties with a child, 2 counts of kidnapping, 7 counts of aggravated sexual battery, 2 counts of sexual battery, 2 counts of attempted aggravated sexual battery, and 5 counts each of breach of privacy and eavesdropping. He worked as a patrolman for 2 decades and was working during the time of his alleged assaults. His alleged crimes took place between 2012 to 2018, and prosecutors believe Todd could have more victims and encourages them to come forward.
Last Thursday, there was an arrest in the murder of Tick-Tock star Ophelia Nichols' son, Randon Lee. Her 18-year-old son was shot at a gas station in Alabama in June. 20-year-old Reuben Goley has since been arrested in connection with his murder. According to police, Randon met up with Reuben and one other man to sell them marijuana, and one of the suspects then shot him inside of his car. Ophelia, who is known as ShoeLover99 on TikTok, has since released a statement that she is grateful but not happy about the arrest. After seeing the mugshot of the 20-year-old who allegedly killed her son, she was struck by how young he looked and how he was just a baby. She's struck by the idea that he has a mother that loves him just as much as she loves her son, and that now there are 2 families hurting. She knows it'll be a long road to justice and hopes it will be done right. As you may have noticed, we've been posting photo hints on our social media each week, so you can take your best guess about the case we'll be discussing on our next episode. We want to give a shout out to congratulate Mish Kaminsky on Instagram, who correctly guessed that last week's episode would focus on so-called angel of death, Donald Harvey.
Just a reminder that we'll be at the Pacific Northwest True Crime Fest this October 8th and 9th at the Green River Conference and Event Center in Auburn, Washington. Don't miss our special live podcast episode on Sunday morning at 10:45, and you can visit us at our table all weekend long. We can't wait to meet you. We've posted a link where you can get your tickets in today's episode notes and on all of our social media pages. Use code MM15 for 15% off your tickets.
Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, Or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include child murder, child pornography, and child sexual abuse. If any of those subjects are particularly sensitive for you, feel free to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
40 years ago today, 3-year-old beauty queen Rachael Runyan was abducted from a playground in Sunset, Utah. But after a nearly month-long manhunt, she was found bound and murdered in a canyon about 15 miles away from home. Though her older brother and another boy at the playground saw the man who had taken Rachael, the two boys, who were 5 and 10, said the man was black, and for years a sketch of a black man was distributed to the public, misdirecting the focus of potential witnesses. Since then, Justin, who's now an adult, came forward saying he didn't believe the man was black, but rather had a darker complexion, but police based a sketch on the description of the older boy. He had tried to tell police the sketch didn't look like the man he had seen as a kid, but this mistake would lead police and the public to look for the wrong man for almost 40 years. Now that the corrected information has been released, a new potential person of interest has been identified, and the case might be closer than ever to being solved. But there have been other misdirections throughout the years, including talk of satanic rituals and snuff films, which were likely red herrings. Our sources for today include Unsolved Child Murders, 18 American Cases, 1956 to 1998, by Emily G. Thompson, an episode of Criminology, Unsolved Mysteries, Wikipedia, and more. For a full list of our sources, be sure to check out our show notes.
Rachael Marie Runyan was born on June 23, 1979, in Weber County, Utah, to her parents Elaine and Jeff. Her older brother, Justin, was born 2 years before her, and her younger brother, Nathan, was born a year and a half later. Elaine and Jeff had moved around from Michigan to Tennessee to Ogden, Utah, before settling down in the much smaller Sunset, Utah. Sunset had a population of around 6,000, and Elaine described it as wonderful and safe. Unfortunately, as we all know, most little towns feel safe until suddenly they aren't. The family moved into a modest home on West 870th North with a backyard that led to a playground at Doxey Middle School. It seemed like a perfect spot for the kids to have a lovely park so close to home. They even installed a gate in their yard so the kids could easily get to the playground.
Elaine couldn't take Rachael anywhere without people mentioning what a beautiful, well-behaved child she was. Her mom described her as an angel on earth. Neighbors would stop Elaine in the grocery store or at church to comment on Rachael's big blue eyes or her curly blonde hair, which she loved to wear in pigtails. She received so much attention that her mom decided to enter her in a beauty pageant in 1981. At the age of just 2, she won the pageant being crowned Little Miss Sunset, a big honor for such a young age. Rachael went to church with her family every Sunday and was always seen carrying around a hand-sewn baby pillow her mom had made her. At just 3 years old, she was a bit young to play with Justin, her older brother who was 5, but she liked to go to the park behind her house to watch him play with friends and to dig around in the sandbox. She would tag along watching Justin and his friends play while sucking her thumb. Her mom said she would tease her that if she kept it up, she would be buck-toothed, to which Rachael would always giggle.
The world still felt like a reasonably safe place for kids in the early 80s, and the small town of Sunset felt especially safe. Still, Elaine was very cautious as a parent and never let the kids play outside alone. A month before, on July 23, 1982, a girl was kidnapped from Kaysville, Utah, just 10 miles away. 10-year-old Melanie Larson was kidnapped from a phone booth near a convenience store. She made a call to a friend and then said she had to go because a man was standing outside the booth waiting to make a call. The next thing she knew, she was being hit over the head, forced into a car, and held hostage for 6 days while she was drugged, raped, and tortured. Melanie managed to escape her attacker, 28-year-old radio DJ Larry Nielsen, and Elaine had closely followed her case. Elaine remembers watching the news with her kids, telling them how much Melanie's mom must miss her. The Runyans were new to the neighborhood, but they'd spent plenty of time playing at the school playground and public park just behind their house. There was a swing set, a slide, and a sandbox, which was Rachael's favorite thing to play with. She liked the swings and slides too, but for Rachael, it was all about the sandbox. Her family actually had a similar playset in their yard, but kids being kids, it just didn't seem as exciting as the schoolyard, which was just 15 feet from their home. Elaine, who was especially worried about her children's safety after Melanie's kidnapping, always accompanied the kids to the playground, even though she could clearly see them from her kitchen window.
On the morning of August 26, 1982, Elaine was home with the three kids while Jeff was at work at a supermarket in nearby Ogden. It was a Thursday. The kids wanted to head over to the school to play, but Elaine was getting ready to make them lunch. She told them they couldn't go just then, but they kept begging and begging. She finally relented. After all, she could keep an eye on them playing from the window while she cooked. She made them the promise to come when she called them back for lunch, and they ran through the gate to the playground. Rachael was wearing a white sundress with green and white flowers with blue trim and matching bloomers, tennis shoes with yellow smiley faces, and a little blue yarn tied in her hair. We actually have a photo of her little outfit she was wearing that day, which we'll post on our social media and YouTube.
Elaine made sloppy joes for the kids for lunch as she occasionally glanced out the window to make sure all was okay. She had a bad feeling about letting them play alone as close to the house as they were. She couldn't help but think about Melanie Larson. She called out to the kids one by one, Justin, Rachael, Nathan, and waited for each of them to answer her. They all answered, and Elaine thought she was just worrying over nothing. Little did she know, just out of view of her window, a man sat at a picnic table, drinking a coffee and watching her children play. He finished his coffee, and around 12:50 p.m., he came over to talk to the kids. They were playing in the sandbox together when the man asked if they liked ice cream. He said he would take them to get some at Bobco's, a local store with an ice cream shop. Rachael said, "I like bubble gum," and the man said he had some in his car and to follow him. Rachael started to follow the stranger, and Justin followed behind Rachael. His car was parked in a nearby church parking lot on the opposite side of the park, but Justin had learned about the idea of stranger danger from his mom. Justin remembers questioning whether or not he was a stranger, but he had always thought strangers were mean, and this man was friendly. Yet he had a bad feeling about going with this man that they'd never met before. The three kids had walked to the other end of the park with the stranger when Justin stopped and told Rachael to come back. Suddenly, the man grabbed her and threw her over his shoulder. He told the two little boys they would be right back. He ran towards his car and threw Rachael into the back seat. She started screaming and had her hands on the window, desperate for help. Her two brothers stood frozen, not knowing what to do.
Just then, Elaine noticed the children had gotten further away from their home and called them in for lunch at 12:55, minutes after the stranger had first approached them. Justin ran up the stairs into the kitchen with fear in his eyes, saying, "Mommy, I have some real bad news." Elaine asked him what was wrong, and he told her Rachael was in a car. She asked what car, and he said a blue car. He told his mom a stranger had taken Rachael. Elaine, overwhelmed with fear at realizing her precious 3-year-old daughter was in danger, dropped to the ground yelling, "He'll kill her, he'll kill her." Justin told his mom the man said they were going to Bobco's for ice cream, so Elaine loaded up the two boys to the store to see if there was any chance he had, in fact, taken her for ice cream. No one at the store had seen Rachael. Elaine called Jeff at work, and he told her to call the police. Justin, 5, and a 10-year-old friend who happened to be at the park that day were able to give some description about the man and the car he was driving. He drove an older 4-door blue car with wood paneling. He was wearing blue jeans with a blue t-shirt and red and white stripes. They believed he was between 5'8" and 6 feet tall and between 25 and 35 years old. He had a mustache and a medium build. As we mentioned earlier, the issue with their description is that he described him as black. They were two young white kids in a predominantly white area in a country that has always done a bad job of differentiating people of color, and it now sounds like the man did have dark skin, but was not black. The police took the two kids' statements at face value, even though Justin kept telling them the sketch didn't look right to him. So for the next 38 years, everyone was looking at an inaccurate sketch of a man who kidnapped and ultimately murdered Rachael. Let's come back to that later.
In 1982, there were no Amber Alerts, no cell phones, and no internet, so things just move slower in investigating child kidnapping cases. A county-wide roadblock was set up within the next half hour to look for the four-door blue car. The Runyans were thrown into the spotlight as they desperately talked to the media, making a plea for anyone with any information about Rachael to come forward. Their fear at the time was that she'd been kidnapped to sell to a rich family for adoption or for child pornography. Little did they know, it would be so much worse. At a press conference in New York a week after she vanished, Jeff Runyan said, quote, "I feel the abductor is without conscience, and my plea is for someone who knows him to come forward and sell him out." Elaine spoke to reporters saying, quote, "Somebody knows this man. Somebody knows this girl. If you see anyone pulling a child or fighting a child, ask her, 'Are you Rachael Runyan? Who is your mommy?'" End quote.
The city of Sunset posted a $20,000 reward for the return of Rachael, and the Runyans raised another $20,000. Neighbors organized a walk for Rachael, which was a 5-mile walk to raise money for her award fund. The community really banded together in hopes of finding the precious 3-year-old. They have said they spent an additional $10,000 making flyers to post about her disappearance. They installed a special line at their house to receive tips about where she might have been taken. On September 19th, 24 days after Rachael went missing, a family pulled their car over near a hiking trail in Mountain Green, Utah, 15 miles from Sunset, for their kids to play. They had a picnic near Trappers Loop Road, and the kids went down to a stream to play and throw rocks in the water. The kids discovered what they believed to be a doll partially floating in the stream, though something clearly seemed off about the doll because they ran to tell their parents what they had seen. The doll turned out to be the naked body of a little girl. Her hands and feet had been tied behind her back using nylon rope. The body was badly decomposed, but the length of her hair, age, and pierced ears did seem to match the description of Rachael.
Police arrived at the Runyan home late that evening. They told the family they thought they'd found Rachael, which gave Elaine hope, just for a moment, that Rachael was okay. They told her they had found a small child's body, which didn't make any sense to her at the time. Did a body mean she was dead, or was this just a term the police used? She held on to her last bit of hope before realizing that her little girl had been found dead. Due to the state of decomposition, authorities were unable to identify her. She was too young to have dental records, and they weren't able to use fingerprints because of the length of time she had been submerged in water. Ultimately, Elaine and Jeff did have to provide identification. Though she didn't have dental records, Elaine recognized her front chipped tooth. They were unable to determine her cause of death, but could not rule out suffocation or strangulation. Police have never stated whether or not Rachael had been sexually assaulted. Not a lot of evidence was discovered at the crime scene, especially since DNA testing as evidence was still a few years away. Investigators believed the man who abducted Rachael was from the area because the store he offered to take the kids to for ice cream, Bobco's, was local. Someone who was just traveling through wouldn't have known about the store having an ice cream shop. A task force was set up in an attempt to get justice for Rachael, and many tips were called in throughout the years. One man told police that Rachael had been murdered for a snuff film. This theory later held more weight for investigators as police received a second tip with a similar story years later. We'll get back to that in a minute.
While visiting Rachael's grave, Jeff had seen a single black rose left for Rachael on 2 occasions. Some people believe the rose was left by the killer, though to our knowledge, no surveillance was ever done to see if her killer did indeed visit her gravesite. Years later, Elaine doesn't put too much stock in this. She pointed out that a wilted rose can look quite dark in color. As a former florist, I can confirm that the only way to obtain black roses in the 80s was through floral spray paint. The photos we have seen of the rose left for Rachael did not appear to have been painted. In 1983, police considered serial killer Arthur Gary Bishop in Rachael's murder. Arthur was found guilty of the murder of 5 boys around Salt Lake City between 1979 to 1983. His victims were 4-year-old Alonzo Daniels, 11-year-old Kim Peterson, 4-year-old Danny Davis, 6-year-old Troy Ward, and 13-year-old Graham Cunningham. Arthur did have a mustache similar to that of the sketch, but didn't look like him otherwise. Arthur confessed to the murder of the 5 boys, but denied having anything to do with Rachael's murder. In 1985, a handwritten note was discovered on a wall of an all-night laundromat not far from the Runyans' home saying, "Beware, I'm still at large. I killed the little Runyan girl. Remember, beware." The note was written in black ink and had an upside-down cross with a 6 at the bottom 3 corners of the cross, of course, making a 666. This was the height of the satanic panic, so while this seems like a very unkind joke now, police took it very seriously at the time. They believed occult members could have been involved.
In April of 1989, an unidentified informant told police her brother had killed Rachael. The woman said he sexually violated and tortured her on videotape. It seemed like police finally had a viable lead, since her story confirmed the earlier tip that Rachael had been killed to make a snuff film. She told police he murdered her in his home in Ogden, Utah, and then dumped her in the canyon. This theory, and the occult theory, were shared on the 1989 episode of Unsolved Mysteries, which detailed Rachael's story. The informant, who named her brother, eventually admitted that she lied about the whole thing, and she was charged with obstruction of justice and served 40 days in jail. After this tip was proven to be false, investigators ran out of leads, and there hadn't been any promising updates to Rachael's case in many years. In 2007, advances in DNA technology allowed a sample to be collected from evidence at the crime scene. We don't have any information about what type of DNA was collected or where from, but it's believed it belonged to the perpetrator.
In 2011, police questioned a person of interest after he choked his girlfriend and abducted his 5-month-old child. The man had lived around sunset at the time of Rachael's murder, and he did drive a blue car, but it didn't closely resemble the car the boys had seen that day. Many have said he looked like the sketch, but we now know the sketch probably didn't closely resemble the man who kidnapped Rachael. Ultimately, police did not have enough evidence to tie him to the case. The next big break for Rachael was in 2019 when private investigator Jason Jensen started working with Rachael's family. He had recently worked on a cold case with the Utah Cold Case Coalition, which he co-founded. And in that case from the 1970s, witnesses had named the suspect as Black at the time. The killer turned out to be Hispanic, and this made Jason think of Rachael's murder. He contacted Elaine and asked her if there was any chance Justin, Rachael's brother, may have witnessed a Latinx man abduct his sister instead of a Black man. Remember, Justin was just 5 years old, and this was the 80s, and he lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. He hadn't had a lot of interactions with people of color at the time and was seeing the world through a rather binary lens. We hope that in the year 2022, police would ask more questions to determine the perpetrator's race, especially when interviewing a 5-year-old witness, but that certainly was not the case for Justin. Elaine talked to Justin, and he remembered never thinking the man who abducted his sister was Black, just that he had a dark complexion. He remembered that he didn't feel like the sketch felt right to him as a child, but the police seemed to be favoring the description from the 10-year-old boy who happened to be at the park that day. Not only was Justin quite certain that the kidnapper wasn't Black, he also remembered the man's mustache as being quite different, and there had actually been a gap in the middle. This was also something he had spoken up about at the time, but again, police favored the description of the other boy. We will post a new updated sketch on our socials as well as on our YouTube, and there's also been a little bit more information about the car the perpetrator was likely driving. Jason believes it was a blue 1973 Ford Pinto Squire. We'll include a photo of that as well.
According to Jason, literally minutes after the updated sketch of the suspect was released, he received a tip with a promising lead. A woman contacted them saying her parents had thought it was her uncle for all these years, but they assumed that since the man had reportedly been Black, they must be wrong. The man, Joseph Lee Apodaca, who went by Lee, had been convicted of sexually abusing a child in the past. According to his niece, quote, Lee had hurt little girls before. Lee had hurt one of the babysitters and did time in jail. That's why when he was around, we were kind of banned from going over there. He had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison for theft, assault, rape, and for sexual abuse of a minor. Though he spent a good amount of time in prison, he was released in 1981 and didn't return until 1986. Lee lived around the area during the time of Rachael's abduction, and he drove a blue Ford Pinto with wood panels, the same car Jason believes was used to abduct Rachael. According to the source, quote, "When you stayed at Grandpa and Grandma's, you grabbed a sleeping bag and pillows and slept in the back of the car. It was fun," end quote. His parents lived near the Runyans, and Lee would often keep his car at his parents' home. When he was released from prison in 1981, he was staying with his parents in their basement. As we mentioned earlier, investigators have always believed the killer was from the area due to the fact that he'd mentioned Bobco's, the local store, to the kids at the park. Lee was looking good as a suspect, but without a confession or DNA, there wasn't enough evidence to tie him to Rachel's murder. The issue was Lee had died 2 years earlier, making a confession impossible. Jason convinced Lee's daughter to provide a DNA sample to compare to the DNA that had been collected from the crime scene back in 2007. The results from that test have not yet been released, but Rachel's family is hoping this could lead them towards a path of closure.
Elaine decided early on that she would dedicate her life and Rachel's legacy to preventing other children from suffering the same fate. She channeled her grief into educating children and their parents on the dangers of abduction and crimes against children. She helped create the organization Missing Children of Utah Incorporated and served as the president for many years. She was active in the passing of legislation to provide action for missing children, and in 2002, the Rachael Alert was designed to help find missing children faster by broadcasting their images and information regarding their abduction on the news and radio statewide. The first time the Rachael Alert was used was a month later in the abduction of Elizabeth Smart. Justin was one of the volunteers who helped search for 14-year-old Elizabeth, who was abducted from her bedroom by Brian David Mitchell in Salt Lake City in 2002. The Rachael Alert was later replaced by the Amber Alert in memory of Amber Hagerman, a 9-year-old girl who was kidnapped and murdered in Arlington, Texas, which was put in place as a federal system. Elaine wasn't upset about the Rachael Alert being replaced, as her goal had always been to keep children safe from abduction.
In 2016, South Park, the park where Rachel was kidnapped from, was officially renamed Rachael Runyan Memorial Park. The idea to rename the park came from a man who lives near Ogden, who had never met the Runyans but heard Rachel's story on Unsolved Mysteries. He did a little digging into the case, and when he saw it was still unsolved, he wanted to find a way that would get people talking about it again. He gained approval from officials from Sunset, the school district, which owns the playground where Rachel played, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, whose parking lot borders the park. Elaine stepped in to help out as well. It was formally dedicated to Rachel's memory on August 26, 2016, with a memorial stone with her photo and a brief summary of her story. The inscription on the stone reads, "In honor of Rachael Marie Runyan, June 23, 1979 to August 26, 1982. Abducted from Doxey Elementary Playground, August 26, 1982.
In March of 2017, the Rachael Runyan Missing and Exploited Children's Day was signed into legislation in Utah. According to Wikipedia, the intent of the day is to encourage individuals in Utah to prioritize child safety and to encourage better response in child abduction cases. In instances where an Amber Alert is implemented and the missing child is subsequently found safe and well, a Rachael Runyan Award is presented to the individual who either locates the missing child or initially alerted authorities to their abduction. Rachel's case is still unsolved, so if you have any information about her disappearance or her murder, please contact the Sunset Police Department at 801-825-1620.
Wow, that's really inspiring how Elaine has handled this. I can't imagine dedicating my life to helping others after something happens to your family that's so heartbreaking and hard to process, you know?
Yeah, she's a force. And, you know, like if something like this has happened to your family, you certainly don't have to do this. Like you're allowed to just like collapse and, you know, like, and just feel sad and whatever.
But like,
but when somebody like does like, you know, put their whole self into trying to help others, like it's just like so impressive that she like found the serotonin and like the ability
like where did you
to be so incredible. And
very impressive.
You know, it's really cool, like the Rachael Alert, like we all of course have heard the Amber Alert, and so many of us know that story. I wasn't aware that this was legislation that predated that and kind of set the path for the Amber Alert, so that's pretty cool.
And again, that's a moment where it would make sense for Elaine to be upset, but instead just focused on the greater goal of helping children in general.
Yeah.
She's not upset. And, all of us know about the Amber Alert now. So obviously it was progress. So
Exactly.
this is
and it's
cool.
really incredible. I did read statistics, and I actually meant to include them, and I forgot to. I apologize, but of like how many times the Rachael Alert was used and was successful. And the Elizabeth Smart case is such a great example of that. Like everybody knows about that disappearance, and it was one of the reasons why she was found so quickly. And that's like so incredible that they were able to contribute to that case as well.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool.
And that Justin, like he joined like the Eagle Scouts that I was reading.
Aww.
And, a part of that, and the little brother too, like they both kind of dedicated their lives, like helping missing children. Like that's been such a big part of their lives. So just really incredible family. And it's amazing how much they've persevered. And it sounds like I'm hoping they get some answers and they finally have the right guy this time.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear that there's a little traction now after so much time. And that doesn't sound like there's anyone that deserves it more than someone that's been so dedicated to helping others despite her grief,
Absolutely.
So cool.
Yeah. And I did see on their Facebook page, which will, of course, include the link to that. I think it's like Justice for Rachael Runyan, I believe is what that Facebook is called. But they are getting ready to do a press release on the day this podcast releases on Friday the 26th. And so, that could be just kind of like, hey, keep on keeping on kind of thing. But it also could be naming the killer. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that
sounds
they have
promising
the right guy.
At this point.
So we'll all tune in. And of course, we'll update everyone if there is a big break announced on Friday as well.
Wow. Definitely fingers crossed for that.
Yes.
So have you been watching anything cool this week?
I did watch a couple things this weekend.
Yeah.
I watched Vengeance, which is a movie with BJ Novak from The Office. He's Brian on The Office.
Never heard of it.
Did you never watch The Office?
I don't think. No, Office, yeah, but
I've never heard
the movie.
of The
I've never heard of it. What is The Office?
Yeah, it's funny. I've not really like seen him in much other than The Office. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything. Like I know that he was, primarily a writer for that show, so I think he's generally a writer producer. But he stars in this along with Issa Rae, and who's just so amazing. And I can't think of his name. He was on that 70s show, the tall one.
The tall one.
Ashton Kutcher.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. We talked about him on an episode before too. So
yeah. He has like a true crime past too. So did we talk about him in a Patreon? Was that where we talked about that?
No, it was I think it was a regular episode. I think, yeah. It was the Gainesville Ripper.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it started off really strong. Like it's a comedy and it's in theaters right now, but it's like a comedy, not true crime, but like, fake crime kind of thing. And it's sort of like in the vein of Only Murders in the Building, where like he finds himself kind of in the middle of this mysterious death, and he is this like sort of like narcissist, like he's a writer and he's like going to make this all about him. So he's like, okay, I'm going to start a podcast about this and like try to solve it. And Issa Rae's his producer. And so it starts off like very like funny and like breezy and whatever for having like a murder background. But like the end kind of took like a little left turn for me. It kind of went off the rails, but I'd still recommend it. It was interesting, but not super amazing. I didn't love the ending.
Huh. Well, that, sounds still worth a watch because I feel like so many things have terrible endings. It's like not most people's forte is writing a solid ending, I feel.
It's so true. But the beginning is very funny and worth it. I was like, this is almost as good as, I'm enjoying this as much as Only Murders in the Building. And I thought that was impossible.
Yeah. It sounds like there's lots of good movies coming to theaters lately, which I haven't been to a theater since more than a year ago, I would say. And I think that's the one time that I went since the pandemic started. So I've been missing a whole bunch of them. And it's getting harder to wait patiently when you're like, wow, there's 6 good movies out right now.
Yeah.
So
and so many of them aren't
maybe
streaming yet. So like you have no choice but to go to a theater, which is fine with me because I like to have snacks.
Yeah. And since I've gone to my last movie, they have built a VIP theater downtown.
Have they?
So yeah. So I'm going to go there because what the heck? It's like you don't have to drive out to the suburbs and you can still get those lazy boys and ice cream
When I come and visit, that's what we're doing.
Okay. That's one solid plan. Yeah.
And other than that, I watched 2 Jurassic Parks. And I watched the most current one and like the one before that in Jurassic World. So have you seen them?
I have seen definitely the first Jurassic Park like a bunch of times, probably like the second one, but like I haven't seen the new one at all. I tried to look for a scammy way of previewing it and could not find a good copy. So that might be one I need to go to the movies for.
I did find a good version.
But I'm excited for it. It's like, so did you love it? The new one?
It was good. Yeah, I'm terrified of dinosaurs, so I have an irrational fear. So it was like, it was a little tough for me.
Scary.
And I definitely did not sleep great that night. But the new one is great because, I haven't loved the Jurassic World, like the new take on it. I haven't loved it. I'm not the biggest Chris Pratt fan and such, but
I mean,
he's not my
fair.
favorite. But they brought back the original crew.
And that's what I'm so excited about. I love Jeff Goldblum, of course, Laura Dern. Yeah, so like,
oh god, she's so good. She's just so good. Like she's just so likable. I like felt emotional seeing her on my screen, like back with dinosaurs. Like she's just so cute.
Can you believe she's so good at playing such a cute, likable person, and then also such a villain? Like she can do anything.
She can do anything. Like, she's so great. But it was good. I really liked it. The second one I thought really lost its way. Was not a favorite for me, but it was like you kind of need to watch it to understand what's going on with the current situation in the third one. But honestly, I probably could have read a summary of the second movie and just like skipped it and like skipped to the end and started at the third one because it was so great.
Jurassic Park reminds me of the end of my babysitting career as a young teen because I had some like weird I watched Jurassic Park with these kids that I was babysitting, and then I put them to bed, and then I got a migraine, and then they inexplicably woke up and were deciding to be brats at that time. So it's like their parents got home while the 2 kids were like jumping on my body and like having a party, and I was like, and they were like, you clearly can't handle this. So like I was, I guess, fired at that time, but I had a migraine.
Oh, I'm right. So. You're right. Like I cannot.
Yeah, just definitely. You're right. I'm out of here. Like forget this. So yeah, that it was fun until after Jurassic Park, I guess.
The end of my babysitting career was I was like babysitting for these like 2 very sweet boys that I had watched for many years, and they were like just the cutest. I love their mom. Their mom is like such a babe. She looks like Gwyneth Paltrow. Like she's so pretty, and she would always like take me out for like margaritas and stuff after. She was very cute. But like they like. We were great. Like I was like their second mom. And then at some point they were starting to get older and we're like, we absolutely don't need you around here. They mutinied me and locked me out of the house. And they're like, goodbye. Like, you're no longer a babysitter. And so like I have like a cell phone. I'm like trying to call like them inside. They have like an answering machine. I'm like knocking on the door. I'm trying to like sweet talk them. And like I had to call their mom. There was like nothing I could do. Like this went on for like hours. And it's like I had to call and like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Like they were practically like my kids at the time. So it's not like I really needed her advice. Like I just needed her to come and like crack the whip and be like, I have a key. This is stopping now. But I was
Yeah.
only getting paid $5 an hour. This was the 90s
So,
or
not
late,
worth the
early
struggle
2000s. So
to-
I was like, goodbye babysitting. I could be working at Starbucks for $14 an hour.
Right. Your story reminds me of me being on the other side of a similar story. Obviously not as a mom because I have no kids, but as the kid, I remember, I don't remember why this was happening, but for some reason, my brother and I were being babysat at a hotel at some point.
Ooh.
And the babysitter grabbed my brother, who was like a baby at the time, and just walked him out on the balcony and was like, look at the view or whatever. And I was like, now's the time to lock the door, and
No, you
completely
did
locked them
not.
out there for the whole rest of the time. There's nowhere to, you're on a balcony. There's nowhere to go. There's no one to call. This was before cell phones, obviously. So that
my God,
terrified
Angelina, I am
babysitter probably
shocked.
quit. I was an evil child. I've got a handful of disturbing stories like that. So
I'm going to keep my eye on you when we get an Airbnb together for this.
I will
for
lock
this
you
fest.
out. Ruin your whole weekend.
You lock me out, I'm breaking a window.
And then we'll have a real good story to tell. So you're welcome.
We're definitely locking each other out.
We're going to have to watch.
We both do it.
of
Now
our
we're both
backs.
locked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Something's going down. We got to watch out for each other.
So did you watch anything this week?
No, thankfully I had those like horrifying babysitter and babysitty stories because I didn't watch anything. So I've got no good stuff to tell you. But I just watched more of, Only Murders in the Building, which I'm upset is ending.
Yeah. We just posted in our Facebook group, y'all, that first of all, the finale is today for us, which is Tuesday,
so
but
it'll
by
be a few
Friday,
days
you've
ago.
already seen it.
Yeah.
But Paul Rudd is going to be in the third season, and I'm very excited.
Which is great. Yeah. I just saw a photo recently of Paul Rudd was apparently in some sitcom way back in the day, and I don't remember what it was called. It was something about a whole bunch of ladies, and then there was just Paul Rudd or something. Some maybe 80s or early 90s sort of sitcom-y thing. And the picture of him there was he looked the same as ever. And I'm like, is
you're
he
saying 80s, and I was like, that can't be. But I'm like, we don't know how old he is. It could have been his 70s.
When was he born? Is he 100?
Is he a
I
witch?
don't really know. Yeah. Has he always been here? Is that there's always been a Paul Rudd?
There's always been a Paul Rudd.
Maybe. So yeah, I'm confused.
I'd like to see this movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna look back and see. It's starting to get confusing.
That's amazing.
Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you need more, you can always find us on murdermurder.news for the latest breaking true crime news articles every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at murdermurdernews, on Twitter at murdernews, on TikTok at murdermurdernews, and on Facebook, if you search for Murder Murder News, you'll see our page pop up.
And when you're on Facebook searching for Murder Murder News, you'll also see our group pop up. You want to join us there to chat about all things true crime, but also to stay in the loop about our upcoming virtual and live events and our book club selections. We're just finishing up The Murder Rule by Dervla McTiernan, which I've been loving because of all the references to the Innocence Project, which is a real great real-life initiative. We hope you'll join us this Sunday, is it 28th?
I think it might be the 28th.
Yes. We hope you'll join us this Sunday, August the 28th, on Zoom to chat about the book.
Do not forget that if you love our show, you need to let us know by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on your podcast listening platform of choice. 5-star reviews really help keep us afloat. They help new fans find the show, and they help us know which content you've been loving the most so we can keep creating more of what you like.
Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week.
Bye, friends.
Bye.